myself from ASC. Thank you for joining me this week. What a week it has been in Sydney, Australia. It has started to get quite cold here, which obviously means winter's coming. No, we're in the thick of it, but hey, we've managed to survive the last few months without too much cold. Thank you for everyone sending through their questions this week. It has been a jam-packed week of these questions, and quite a few of them have been centered around cybersecurity, and I appreciate that. And so today's going to be addressing a fair few of the questions you sent through. I've got a special guest in Kevin Loh joining me today as well to help kind of go through some of these points and comments. Now, before I introduce Kevin, I definitely need to say Happy Nurses Day today. So it's International Nurses Day. We really appreciate all the effort our nurses do in our healthcare system. In addition, I will be at the Corporality Summit next Thursday. For anyone who wants to join, feel free to message me. I will send you my code and you can get a free ticket on my behalf. So please feel free to join me. And as always, feel free to comment in the section below if you have any questions around this. Both myself and Kevin will attend to this as soon as the session has finished. Now, without further ado, let me introduce Kevin to the conversation. Kevin, how are you doing?
Hi, good morning, Chris. I'm good. How about yourself?
Very well, thank you. Thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate that. I appreciate that you're obviously in Singapore right now and taking your time out to start answering some of these tricky questions, shall we say.
No problems for a friend like you.
Oh, mate, thank you. Now, so one of the big questions I have had recently in the last few months is EDR, XDR, AV, right? These are acronyms. And then in IT, we have acronyms galore, which is probably unfortunate, but let's talk about something that's called the evolution of AV. Would that be the first part to start, right? So evolution of AV, antivirus, as it's well known, was probably systematically based on a set of rules and what is very similar to that. And obviously these would determine whether or not you could see certain patterns on applications that were installed to be able to detect viruses. Now that has evolved rapidly over the last 10 years minimum. EDR, is that the evolution? Tell me.
Well, not really. EDR is a very different thing from antivirus. So we know antivirus from probably, like you mentioned, a decade ago. It's always based on certain kind of signatures, right? I'm sure 10 years ago, you always hear people saying that you need to keep updating your signatures so that you get protected. In that sense, you are talking about very malware-centric kind of attacks, or even try to prevent them from entering into your system. So that's AV. But what EDR is different, well, in short, EDR, perhaps for the benefit of people who are viewing this, EDR stands for Endpoint Detection and Response. So basically what it does is a technology that continuously monitoring an endpoint. So your endpoint could be your user notebook, could be running Windows, could be running Mac, could be your servers, could be your cloud instance, could be anything that's running containers, running Kubernetes, or whatever that is there in the market, right? So it will continue monitors that and determine whether you are under any threats. So it's very different from AV. AV is very looking at how a short or better word, how malware functions. Now, in EDR, you basically look at processes. You collect whatever that information you have on your endpoint and determine whether a process triggering another is roach. And then you decide that, oh, this is no good. Create a detection, create incidents. Yeah, that's in short. So it has morphed to a very different way of handling malware, because today we know that malware is just, there are much lesser malware these days. It become malwareless.
Interesting point. Interesting point. I mean, malware is an ever-growing threat. I mean, probably one of the larger ones that you've seen, especially over the last 10 years. 90% or more of threats occur from an end user's accidental click. So, I mean, you've probably heard me say, and I'm sure many of my audience have heard me say, think before you click. That's a common occurrence, right?
Right.
And so, you know, obviously our behaviors as humans have changed over the last, well, probably 2 or 3 years. It's a fair assessment that now we have changed how we work, where we work, right? And that's probably been highly escalated by the fact that the pandemic meant that we had to be able to work from certain locations and home included, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, I'll park that conversation for a second, because that obviously means that working from anywhere means we need to change what our security profile looks like. But back to the point. So one of the questions we've been asked a lot lately is, obviously there's an evolution of antivirus, AV, into endpoint protection. EDR versus XDR. Give us some insights.
Right. So, like I mentioned, EDR actually means endpoint detection and response. XDR, by the definition of X, in which Gartner actually made a very broad statement at the end of 2021, if I'm not wrong, it means extended detection and response. So what does this extended means? So in EDR, just like I mentioned, is endpoint. So when you extend, it extends out of your endpoint. So
Right.
perhaps extended to probably your network infrastructure, your email security, your identity, your firewalls, for example. So what it actually means is that in XDR technology, you basically create collecting information of what you have in your parameter, in your network environment, in whatever security measures that you have, and then decides of correlating them and decides to stitch up the entire incident for you. So in an incident now, besides seeing what you see in the endpoint, which is on the EDR, you see actually what happens on your email gateway, for example, in your firewall, in your identity, for example, right? So that is where you get an overview of your posture because of an incident immediately. So that's what typically an XDR is. Am I answering your question? Or are you more confused?
No. Look, I mean, for me, that might make more sense, but I guess that's where we start to talk about that evolution, right? And so I'll take one step back. When we speak about cyber protection, cyber awareness, cyber security, I tend to speak in three versions, right, of this. And when we talk about that, we talk about self-defense, passive defense, and active defense. Okay, self-defense is education. It's knowing what to look out for in phishing attacks, etc. To your point about malware. Passive defense is implementing a cybersecurity framework, and that in Australia could be something like a Cybersecurity Essential 8 or NIST if you wanted to go on a global scale, ISO as well. So ISO security, all of these frameworks are possible to be implemented, and the control measures will allow you to have a bit more of a passive in regards to protection. But in active, that's where we started to talk about just what you've spoken about, which is XDR and EDR, right? And we take that to one step further because there are controls that are constantly looking for threats. It's not just a case of let's sit there, do a scan based on a bunch of parameters, as you've said, an old school database style search. And therefore, we're taking that to a full active engagement around being cyber aware. Now, you've made a very valid point around, obviously understanding your parameter. And so that takes it even further. And I think that's probably one of the things we've seen more so driven by the pandemic, in the fact that people can work from anywhere, anytime. And when we spoke previously in some of these sessions, the control measures that were in a, let's call it legacy state, used to be focused around being in an office. And these are the things like firewalls, and, local detection security appliances. Now we've gone to a work anywhere, anytime type of engagement, right? Have you seen the uptake of, let's call it this evolution of AV to EDR as a benefit to those being able to work remotely?
Well, definitely, because working from home, like I mentioned, traditional AV always require signature updates. The effectiveness depends on how old your signatures are in your endpoint, right? Now, from a work from home perspective, how often do you see that your IT team tries to push you an update, and then because of whatever reason, because remotely, you are in Australia, we are in Singapore, we have the benefits of very good infrastructure. How about there are some other people that may not have that? So pushing an update then could be a challenge, and how to keep up that update becomes the next challenge. Now, from an EDR perspective, definitely is always pretty more. It's more predictable in the sense whereby you don't need any updates. You just keep running it. It just keep monitoring. Now that creates a lesser hassle on the IT team or on the cyber team. Now, is there a bigger uptake on EDR? I think definitely. I think from corporate, from organization perspective, there is already a very good adoption of EDR, forgetting about the traditional antivirus. That's why you see in the marketplace. I think today the adoption of EDR is actually is growing every year. If you
Yeah.
realize the last 3-4 years, I mean, especially during the pandemic years, over the last 3 years, people start to work from home. It becomes the adoption gets even faster because it's easier to manage these endpoints actually, if you look at it from that angle.
Yeah, and I'll take it one step further. Traditional AVs would report back to a centralized server for the majority, right? And now we've seen, obviously, the evolution of SaaS-based products, for example. And in this instance, for the most part, the ability for these sort of applications, or let's call them security measures, to be working from anywhere, just using an internet source, because it then reports back to a cloud-based platform, which means it can be monitored and managed from anywhere in the world. That enables a lot of visibility. And I think that's probably one of your points, was not having to rely on your ITT or a cyber team, right? And so what is it that the value of this as a administrator, what is the value they see versus the traditional, centralized AV management?
Well, one of the things that you definitely goes without a central management platform is that you do not have to invest in infrastructure in your own data center, right? You do not have to invest on something whereby you might host it in the cloud as a central management. So without that, your cyber team do not have to keep updating it. You do not have to keep looking at whether is it up to date, whether is there enough storage space, whether the server has to be upgraded, and things like that, right? You do not have to think about patching them. So those kind of time has been saved and it's been offloaded in a, like what you mentioned, a SaaS-based cloud product of an EDR, for example. So that helps doing more using lesser time. So that helps drive productivity, yet at the same time increase your security posture. I think that there are a lot of benefits to it. Gone are the days whereby you have to think about, do I have to shut down my management server over the weekend because I need to do a critical patch?
Yeah. Absolutely. And look, you make a valid point in regards to that. The world has changed and we're looking at an always on type of industry movement where we're not actually looking at being down, if at all, ever, right? I think that's probably the most important part, because we're active, we're working anytime, anywhere, we're working across time zones, across the globe. So it does make a difference, especially in a global organization. They don't have to consider, the time zone in, for example, Australia versus London, we can't shut the service down at this point because at that point, Sydney will be offline, for example.
Right. Definitely. That resonates well with many people, I believe.
Yeah, well, more and more now, these organizations, and you just need to look at the pandemic. There are thousands of locations where you can work from visa-free. So people have started to take, working from home overseas, so they can make things a little bit different. Now, the evolution of, let's call it, endpoint management has changed because of the fact that we literally have been thrown through a digital transformation. It's called Mother Nature. What do you see as that next evolution around managing these endpoints and being more secure?
Right. I think the evolution of EDR will probably be coming in. Like you mentioned when you beginning, you asked what is XDR. So the evolution of EDR will probably go to XDR. I think the next question is, Chris, that there are people who are asking, is XDR actually a SIM? With XDR, do I go away with my SIM?
Right.
Is XDR then an equivalent of the SOAR? So these are coming in. These are questions that people tend to ask. In my area of work, there are people who ask whether vis-a-vis, can I, if I have XDR, can I do it with my SIM? With XDR, can I do it away with my SOAR? So the perspective of what is needed in every organizations are different. There are requirements and needs of a cyber team or even infrastructure teams becomes varied. So
Right.
so it has to be handled with care. That evolution is coming because people do see the benefits of XDR. I think XDR has been like in the market for probably a good three years now.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So that drives the curiosity, the need to actually evolve.
Right. Can I throw the last question at you, which is one that's been coming at us both this week, which was around how much of this cybersecurity world, endpoint protection, is going to be AI driven? What's your feedback?
Sorry, Chris, I lost that last couple of.
Sure. So, I mean, the question we both got asked was how much of the future of these, endpoint protections is going to be AI driven?
Well, I'm sure it's a very good question, Chris. Perhaps a lot of people may not be aware. Now, when we say EDR, it is actually running off observing what is actually at the endpoint. But who are actually observing it? Is it a set of fixed instruction, or is it a fixed signature? But it's neither of them, because at the back of it, who are actually observing what is actually happening on the endpoint through a EDR is actually AI, it's actually ML. So without going very deep into details, they are already there, which many people thought may not be aware of that. So that's where the interesting part is.
Yeah.
Because there's no way today from a human perspective is able to really observe every single details of an endpoint at real time. You need a machine to do that.
Correct.
And that machine basically is run by AI and ML.
Perfect. Yeah, agreed. And as you said, the technology is already available. And the other thing is it doesn't get tired. It doesn't miss a beat. It doesn't accidentally go get a coffee and then come back too late. So it is great to see that we already have that embedded in that sort of endpoint protection. Now, as always, I love to ask, what is a golden nugget of information you'd like to leave with the audience?
Very good point. I believe there's no such thing as that you don't get breached. It's always good to be prepared for the breach, and
Correct.
make sure you do your utmost to uphold that, and not thinking that if you don't have any breaches for the last 1 year means I don't have any breach for the next 10 years. That don't happen.
Yeah.
So
like
it's always a constant war, and it's always interesting that adversaries are always looking for valuable information in your organization. So stay safe.
It's not if, it's when. Be protected. Great insights, Kevin. Thank you so much for joining us today. I will link Kevin in the comments up above so that you can find his profile on LinkedIn. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below so we can answer those for you. And as always, feel free to send through your questions so that I can attend to those in the coming weeks on these sessions around top tech tips. That's a tongue twister and a half. Thanks again, Kevin, for joining me. Really appreciate it. And as always, I say, stay safe online. Think before you click. And exactly as Kevin, be prepared. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend. Talk soon.
Thanks, Chris.
Bye now.